Imagine a war, not over land, not over gold, but over a bucket. Sounds crazy, right? But this is exactly what happened in 1325 between two Italian city-states, Modena and Bologna. This wasn't just any bucket, it was a wooden bucket, taken from a well in Bologna. To Modena, it was a prize. To Bologna, it was a provocation. This stolen bucket ignited a conflict that would be remembered for its sheer absurdity. Italy in the 14th century was a patchwork of independent city-states. Think rival gangs but with nicer clothes and a taste for art. They fought constantly. Land, power, wealth, everything was up for grabs. Modena and Bologna were neighbors, rivals, and constantly at each other's throats. Their citizens bickered like siblings, except their fights involved swords and crossbows. Tensions were high, and all it took was a spark to ignite the flames of war. One night, a group of Modenese soldiers snuck into Bologna. Their mission: steal a well bucket. Why a bucket? Maybe they wanted to humiliate Bologna, maybe they were just bored. Whatever their reason, they succeeded. The bucket was taken to Modena, paraded through the streets, and put on display. It became a symbol of victory, a reminder of Modena's daring raid. Little did they know this bucket would soon become a symbol of something else entirely. Bologna was furious. They demanded the bucket back. Modena laughed. And so began the war. The Modenese, emboldened by their bucket-stealing success, marched on Bologna. The battle was short and brutal. The Modenese, perhaps fueled by the righteousness of their cause, or maybe just a good breakfast, crushed the Bolognese army. They took prisoners, claimed victory, and most importantly, kept the bucket. Bologna couldn't accept defeat. They gathered a larger army, thirsting for revenge, and maybe their bucket back. They marched on Modena, confident in their superior numbers. The battle that followed was a disaster for Bologna. Their attack was disorganized and clumsy. The Modenese, fighting with the ferocity of bucket-protecting warriors, repelled the attack and sent the Bolognese army running. Section 6, The Bucket's Legacy, a symbol of victory and mockery. The War of the Bucket was over. The conflict, which had started over a seemingly trivial object, had left a lasting impact on both Modena and Bologna. The battlefield, once filled with the clashing of swords and the cries of warriors, now lay silent, a testament to the futility of the war. Modena had won, and the bucket, once a humble well accessory, became a legendary trophy. This simple wooden bucket, which had once served the mundane purpose of drawing water, was now a symbol of Modena's triumph. It was no longer just a bucket, it was a piece of history, a relic of a bizarre yet significant conflict. It was displayed prominently in Modena's cathedral, a constant reminder of their victory and Bologna's humiliation. The cathedral, a place of worship and reverence, now housed this peculiar trophy, turning it into a shrine of sorts. Visitors would come from far and wide to see the bucket, marveling at its story and the strange twist of fate that had elevated it to such prominence. The bucket became the butt of jokes. In the streets and markets of Modena, jesters and townsfolk would often mock Bologna, using the bucket as a symbol of their folly. It became a source of amusement, a way for the people of Modena to celebrate their victory and poke fun at their rivals. Bologna was ridiculed, their defeat immortalized in songs and stories. Troubadours and bards would sing of the War of the Bucket, turning it into a legend that would be passed down through generations. These songs and stories served as a reminder of the absurdity of the conflict and the consequences of pride and arrogance. The war, fought over a seemingly insignificant object, became a cautionary tale against pride and pointless conflict. It was a lesson in humility and the dangers of letting trivial matters escalate into full-blown wars. The bucket, in its simplicity, had taught a profound lesson to all who heard its story, reminding them of the importance of wisdom and restraint in the face of conflict. Section 7, The Bucket Today, a relic of a ridiculous war. Centuries later, the bucket still exists. It's a simple wooden bucket worn by time but remarkably intact. It's now kept under lock and key in Modena, a relic of a war that seems too strange to be true. Tourists flock to see the bucket, this unlikely symbol of victory and absurdity. It's a reminder that history is full of surprises, and sometimes even the most ridiculous conflicts can have lasting consequences. Section 8. Lessons from a Bucket. The Absurdity of War. The War of the Bucket is a tale that might seem absurd at first glance, but it carries with it profound insights into human nature and the folly of conflict. The War of the Bucket is a hilarious story, but it also offers a valuable lesson. Imagine a group of soldiers, not unlike those you see here, who found themselves embroiled in a conflict over something as trivial as a wooden bucket. Yes, a bucket. It sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? Yet this is a true story from medieval Italy, where the city-states of Modena and Bologna went to war over a stolen bucket. It shows how easily pride, rivalry, and a healthy dose of stupidity can lead to conflict. The leaders of these city-states, driven by pride and a desire to assert dominance, escalated a minor incident into a full-blown war. The absurdity of the situation is a stark reminder of how human emotions and egos can often cloud judgment and lead to unnecessary violence. It's a reminder that war is often senseless, and the things we fight over aren't always worth the cost. The aftermath of the War of the Bucket was devastating, with lives lost and resources wasted, all for the sake of a wooden bucket. This story serves as a poignant example of the futility of war, and the heavy price that is often paid for trivial reasons. The next time you find yourself in an argument, remember the War of the Bucket. Think about the absurdity of fighting over something so insignificant, and reflect on whether the issue at hand is truly worth the conflict. Often we find ourselves caught up in disputes that, in the grand scheme of things, are as trivial as that medieval bucket. Ask yourself, is this really worth fighting over? Consider the consequences and the potential fallout of the conflict. Is the issue at hand worth the emotional and possibly physical toll it might take? More often than not, the answer is no. By taking a step back and evaluating the situation, we can avoid unnecessary disputes and focus on more meaningful and constructive endeavors. Or are we just being silly? Sometimes a little humor and perspective can go a long way in diffusing tension and preventing conflict. Just like the medieval jesters who used humor to bring people together, we too can use laughter and lightheartedness to bridge divides and foster understanding. So the next time you find yourself on the brink of an argument, remember the War of the Bucket, and ask yourself if it's really worth it. Chances are, it's not. Section 9. Beyond the Bucket. Other bizarre battles in history. The War of the Bucket isn't the only example of a ridiculous war. Throughout history there have been numerous conflicts that, when looked at through a modern lens, seem utterly absurd. These battles often started over trivial matters, yet they escalated into full-blown wars, leaving us with stories that are both amusing and bewildering. History is full of strange conflicts fought over seemingly insignificant things. Take, for instance, the War of Jenkins's Ear. This conflict between Britain and Spain in the 18th century was ignited when a British captain, Robert Jenkins, had his ear cut off by Spanish coast guards. He presented his severed ear to the British Parliament, which led to a declaration of war. It's hard to believe that such a small body part could lead to years of bloodshed. Then there's the Pig War between Britain and the United States, sparked by a pig shot on disputed territory. In 1859, an American farmer shot a British-owned pig that was rooting in his garden on San Juan Island. This seemingly minor incident escalated into a standoff between British and American forces, with both sides fortifying their positions. Fortunately, the conflict was resolved without any human casualties, but it remains a curious example of how tensions can flare over the smallest of provocations. And let's not forget the Emu War in Australia, where the Australian army waged a losing battle against a horde of emus. In 1932, the government deployed soldiers armed with machine guns to cull the emu population that was damaging crops. Despite their efforts, the emus proved to be surprisingly resilient and elusive, leading to a comical and ultimately unsuccessful military campaign. The Emu War is a testament to the unpredictability of nature and the sometimes futile attempts of humans to control it. These stories, like the War of the Bucket, remind us that history can be strange, funny, and sometimes just plain ridiculous. They serve as a reminder that not all conflicts are born out of grand political or ideological struggles. Sometimes they arise from the most unexpected and trivial circumstances, leaving us with tales that are as entertaining as they are perplexing. So the next time you hear about a bizarre historical event, remember that truth is often stranger than fiction.